Let's now study the second console tester. It is assumed that you actually studied the first console tester in the earlier video very carefully about its rationale and also the two different scenarios where you got either implementation correct or implementation incorrect. And in this second tester, I will try to make the example a little bit more complicated just to give you a little bit challenge to think about. Okay, let's now present the code of the tester and then we'll illustrate the different scenarios. We're gonna simply declare a different class called ConsoleTester2 with the main method, and we're still going to initialize a counter, and its value should be 0. Okay, that one's the same as before. And when we say try block over here, and you will see that in this test case, I deliberately try to do a nested try and catch block to show you what might be possible when you write the try and catch block for exception handling. So that's something I would like you to pick up also beyond the lecture. What we are trying to do is, remember initial value is actually 0, and what's the maximum value for the counter, as we learned before? The maximum value constant should be 3, just recall that. So we got an increment from 0 to 1, 1 to 2, and also 2 to 3. For all these 3 increments, we don't expect any value too large or value too small exception to be thrown, especially the value too large exception, which is what I want to focus on for this part of the tester. After these 3 increments, I should really get a value 3, right? From 0 to 1, 1 to 2, and 2 to 3. So the final value should be 3. And then after this, I just got a nested try. Okay, I'll show you how the execution flow will look like, but you can definitely have a nested try and catch. I'm doing this for a reason. Okay, let's see. And this increment here attempts to increment the counter value from 3 to 4, and pretty much analogous to the case where I try to decrement the value from 0 to -1, I would expect some exception to be thrown, specifically the value too large exception to be thrown from this line, right? You can see the nature of this 4th increments is actually different from the nature of these 3. For these 3, I don't expect any value too large exception to be thrown because I'm still incrementing within the bounds. But this 4th one over here, given that has already reached its maximum, it should not be allowed, right? So some exception is expected to be thrown. And in this case, I'll say print out the error, value too large exception not thrown, meaning that if I didn't have any exception thrown from this line, if I can reach this line, so that means the exception expected was not thrown. So that's why it should be an error. And let's take a look at the catch block over here. If that exception was indeed actually thrown, and so that means that should be a success. But now I want to talk, so you can think about this try catch block here is the inner one, right? This part here only handles about this 4th increments over here, right? You can see only the 4th increments is within the try block. That one is really handling to see if this particular increment method will throw the value too large exception as expected. But now we also need to worry about what if some value too large exception was thrown unexpectedly from either this, from 0 to 1, from 1 to 2, or from 2 to 3. If any of the value too large exception happened at this timing, that should be considered as unexpected behavior, right? So that's why I said this test here is a little bit more challenging than before. So given that you understood the previous test, this one should not be too bad. But we're going to go over still the different scenarios to make sure you understand that properly. So that's why you can see, think about this catch block here corresponds to the try block over here, right? So this catch block, let's think about what it is doing. It's doing the following. If either this increments or this increments or this increment, if either one of them is actually throwing some value too large exception unexpectedly, it will be caught over here. In that case, the exception was thrown prematurely. That should be considered as an error. That's why we're putting here, right? I'm just trying to give you the high-level rationale about why the test should be designed this way. And of course, you gotta watch out for the try and catch that's nested over here. There are many things to pick up from this particular example. And also, I'm going to leave that to your self-study when you study the lecture notes. So there is an equivalent automated JUnit test, which we'll speak about later. So that's something you can click on the link, and then you'll be linked to that particular detail for the test. All right. So now I would like to speak about 3 different cases for this test over here. And this test is reasonably complicated, I think, but I think it's very valuable about its coverage. Okay. let me now switch to iPad over here. The same block of code for ConsoleTester2 over here. Okay, I already went over line by line with you, but I try to go a little bit backwards together with you. Okay, so we got 3 different messages that might be possible from this particular test. Either the value too large exception was thrown unexpectedly. What's going to happen? Well, what can be the cause of this, right? If this actually happened, let's think about backwards. If this actually happened, that means either this or this or this actually throw the exception unexpectedly, right? So that's something I would like to talk about, right? So let's say here, so that means either this or this over here or this. Unexpected thrown, unexpectedly thrown, value too large, exception. All right, so that's the first one. But we're going to see the exact execution flow in a moment. So what about the second one? The second one here is the pink one that I want to highlight over here. So what about if we get to here? If we get to here, so that means these 3 were actually okay. They did not actually throw any unexpected value too large exception. That is why after these 3 increments call, we were able to go to the try, and then we were able to go to this increment over here. Okay, so let me, for the pink, I'm still going to increment, execute this, execute that, and execute that. And then I'm still going to go to the try block and still going to execute this particular increments over here. However, this one over here is actually going to not throw the exception as expected, which is incorrect. So that means we're going to go, let me just go a little bit better. Okay, so that means from this line over here, after executing this line, we are just going to go to the immediate line over here. So that means the expected value too large exception not thrown. Okay, so that's the second case, which I will also illustrate a little bit more in detail. The third one that I would like to talk about is the green one. The green one is really when the implementation is entirely correct, right? You can see for this error here, or for this error here, they actually reveal certain aspect of error in your implementation of increments, which we'll see. But what about the success? The success really means the following, conceptually. So let's go to green. We execute this increment, execute this increments, execute this increment. After the 3 increments, none of which will actually throw any exception like this unexpectedly, which is good. And then we're also going to execute this increment over here, and that one is really to attempt to increment the value from 3 to 4, which should not be allowed. In that case, it's going to be disrupted and then go to the catch block over here, and then it will actually be caught by this exception here. That's why we'll say success over here. Right, so I'm just trying to talk about the 3 cases from a bird eyes view to actually show to you what we can expect. Let's now discuss all these cases one by one. Okay, the first one. Hey, let's see. For the first one here, let's say we got the correct implementation over here. So for the correct implementation, let's just go line by line. We're going to initialize the counter, and then its value should be 0. And then we go for the outer try block, and then we go for increments, and then you can see here increments, increments, increments. See the increments. At this point, before that, the value of the counter is actually 0, right? And then after this increment, the value will be 1. And after this, the value will be 2. After this, the value will be 3, just to let you know. And then in this case, I don't need to step into on the paper. I'll show that to you on Eclipse a little bit. But I can see this is actually the correct implementation. So this is actually correct. Okay, just emphasize that. So this is actually correct. And for all these cases, either 0 or 1 or 2, right? You can see here, you can be either 0 or 1 or 2. And what's the maximum value for the counter? It should be 3. right? You can see none of these. 0 equals 3 will be false. 1 equals 3 will be false. 2 equals 3 will also be false. That means we're never going to actually execute this, right? It's going to be bypassed. So we just increments the counter value appropriately. Okay, that's good. And then we're going to print out to say current value will be, after this, it would just be 3 over here. Hopefully you're still following me. And then we're going to go into the inner catch block, inner try and catch block over here. And then we're going to say C dot increments, right? When we execute this, at this point, we know right before that, we know the counter value is actually 3. And when we actually do 3, let me just use a slightly different color over here. See, it's going to be 3 over here, right? If I do value, when I try to execute this increment once more, right? So value is going to be 3. 3 equals counter value maximum, which will be 3. So that'll be true. So that means we're still actually going to execute. We are actually going to execute this time the throw new exception over here. So this is actually expected behavior because the counter value already reached its maximum, and then we're gonna bypass the else part. Right, so after this exception here is actually thrown, what's going to happen is we're going to be disrupted from this line over here to the catch block over here, and then this will be caught. So that's why we'll see success. So by executing this particular print line statement here, we know that the catch block is executed, and then the rest of the try block will be just bypassed over here, right? Like that. And then after executing the print line, we'll also execute the rest of the catch block until over here. And then remember, this catch block is actually meant to catch, is the outer one, right? You can think, let me just give you some visual hints over here. You can see this catch block over here corresponds to the try block over here, right? So far, there has not been any value to large exception from here. There has not been any value to large exception thrown from here. And there's one thing very important, okay? I think I should really talk about it as well. You can see, let me just box it over here. For this particular try and catch block, as soon as the value to large exception that's thrown from this method call, from 3 to 4, right? From the maximum value to above it is actually caught over here. The value to large exception will not be propagated any further outside this pink box, right? Remember we mentioned before, as soon as the thrown exception is actually caught, that means it has been handled. So it will not be propagated any further, right? It's really important to say that, okay? I do want to explain to you about the outer try and catch block carefully. So from here, as soon as the value to large exception is handled, it will not be propagated further. And of course, over here, the value to large exception was due to this particular increment, right? But since it's wrapped within this inner try and catch block, so it will not be propagated any further. So as far as the outer try and catch block is concerned, as far as it is concerned, each of the line, this line, this line, this line, this line, and also this try and catch block, all of these will not actually propagate any value to large exception any further. So that's why this will never be executed, right? It's a very important point that you want to understand as well. So this will not be executed, this will not, and this will not. And this is simply the rest of the main program. It will be executed after the outer block, outer try and catch block is executed. So we just execute this, and then we're done with the program, and program will terminate. Let me just emphasize, it's really important to for you to understand why, as far as the outer try and catch block is concerned, why this here, the catch block, will never be executed. It's, especially this inner catch block already handles the value to large exception from this particular increment as expected. so that it will not be propagated any further. It will just not be. All right. So we are still following our catch or specify requirement as spoken before. Let me show you very quickly about this case on Eclipse. Let's see how we can reproduce it. All right, so let me just close. We still got counter. We don't have counter test 1 anymore. We still got the same counter, but now we are gonna focus on the increment method. Okay, just to remind you. So let's go to counter test number 2. Okay, let me just clear the console over here. Okay, let me just without stepping into, let me just show you the flow. Okay, let me just go to double click on this. Let's say set a breakpoint here, and then I will launch the debugger and switch to debug perspective. Okay, let's start from here. And we're gonna step over, and now none of the increments over here will throw any value too large exception as unexpectedly. So we're gonna say step over. You can see all of them will just go over the normal execution flow. And then we're going to print out the value. You can see after initially 0, after 3 increments, it's now gonna be 3. And this increment here is a different nature. You will throw the value too large exception as expected. So that means we're going to interrupt the flow, and then you will, rather than executing the immediately following line, we are going to go to this particular catch block, right? Let's say step over, right? So now we go into the catch block over here. It's going to say success. After saying success, we are going to say we are not actually going to execute this value too large exception because it was not even thrown from here, and from here, and also it's not going to be propagated outside this try and catch block as I explained to you. So this one is simply not going to be executed. We'll just bypass that. Notice that this arrow over here is really indicating the last line. The last bits, this closing brackets for the try block is not really indicating the catch block. I could have just hit an enter from there. Okay, so this one here, just don't get confused. The arrow over here is showing that we are now right before executing the end of the try block over here, but the catch block will definitely be bypassed. If I say step over, you can see we completely bypassed the catch block as I explained before. And then now we are reaching the end of the main method, and then we just say step over, and then we are done. All right. So that's for the first test case, for the first scenario where the implementation is actually correct.